we're going to start because I don't see anybody else coming for now. So welcome everybody. This time it's me, so Mathieu. I don't know if you guys can pronounce that, but you can call me Mathieu if that doesn't work. Today we're going to talk about visual messages. So last set of lectures were about vocal messages. So this time, what can we tell from the body? What can we tell from a face? And I'm going to introduce you to some state-of-the-art algorithms for face detection, facial landmark recognition that you can use for is basically detecting facial expressions such as emotions. And we'll have a quick introduction, maybe we'll see, for basically you all heard about deep learning. There's an algorithm, a type of network called convolutional neural networks that is revolutionizing the way visual recognition is being done. So I'll do a quick introduction because those topics will be done later in the course. All right. So to start off, you may all have heard about, I think we talked about it in the last discussion, but this quote from Albert Mehrabian saying that you have about 7% of in communication, 7% of what you send is verbal, 38 is vocal, and 55 is visual. And why it's a pretty neat quote. It's used everywhere all the time, probably quite in a wrong way, because it was done in a very specific instance. So what people usually quote from that study is that. So really what you say has not that much importance. What's really important is all visual. It's not really true, because what Albert Mehrabian did actually was a study about what feelings and attitudes are expressed. So it was actually a mix of various studies. For example, in one you had a woman saying the word maybe with different kinds of intonations, such as maybe, or maybe, maybe. And you had 3 different kinds of pictures, so her smiling or her frowning. And they tried to see what people ascribed with these inconsistent feelings and attitudes. They tried to see what was a predominant, basically, signal. Was it a photo? Was it a visual message? Was it vocal? And so there were also a couple of other studies, but it was in such a specific context that it's hard to generalize so much. However, it is true that a lot of context or contextual information, a lot of information in general can be taken from facial expression in general and also the whole body. So let's see a small example from Seinfeld, and let's try to look at the video and try to see all the kind of signals that you perceive, all the kind of modalities, what's involved, and what do you perceive.
I mean, you're never going to be able to completely stop talking. Jerry, 94% of communication is nonverbal. Watch. What does this mean? Frank Still's reaction to hearing about George's man love for the cheese.
Right? So what was that? What did you see? What did Seinfeld use? Anybody?
Non-verbals. Gestures, postures.
So gestures, postures. Emotional face. Okay, facial expressions, emotions. So there are many things. Not again. And we're going to talk about all of them in sequence. So you also have eyes, so gaze information, and maybe not in that context specifically, but it's also very important. The posture, the way you sit, the way you arrange yourself spatially around the room next to somebody, oriented towards someone, also tells a lot of things. Those are called proxemics. So eye contact, the head, the eyes, facial expression. So we talked a little bit about action units, and we're going to go through them a little bit deeper today. And appearance. So let's do all of these in a sequence. So what does appearance convey? What can you tell from clothes? What you can tell from body type? Any ideas? What can you tell from somebody's clothes? What in this context, for example?
Status, maybe.
Social status?
Profession.
Profession, absolutely. So those are the 2 main things. Clearly in that picture we can see various types of professions, and we can already ascribe a job for somebody. Also in general appearance, we can see many things. So the age, obviously, gender, cultural background, professional status. There are many stereotypes and biases associated with physical appearance. Height is one, for example, that's very clear and it has been replicated in studies. People that are taller are seen to be of a higher status, they are seen more confident, and maybe they actually are because of this back and forth. So they see people are looking at them as more confident, so they become more confident. Attractiveness causes what is called this halo effect. So if somebody is attractive, they're seen as more friendly, they're seen as more competent, they're seen as more successful. So all of these different stereotypes, we probably have no actual value. They exist and it's good to be aware of them. However, it's definitely not what we're going to be focusing on the course. Now, so I'm going to start with gestures. So this is an example of Italian gestures. So in Italy, it is known for having, they're known for having very, very many gestures. So let me know which one do you know? Well, maybe not that one. This one's very, very common. So it's good to know. This one we have in France too, actually. So this video is like 5 minutes long. So really, Italian is such a gesture-heavy language that it's created so many different studies just around the Italian language, around the use of gestures. All right. So I'm going to try to engage you quite much in this lecture, so try to bear with me here. So why do we do? Here are a couple of different questions. First, why do we do gesture? Why does this happen?
I think when we want to do it intentionally, it's to strengthen the meaning of the words that we're saying.
So there's one use, which is to put emphasis on something. That's definitely one use. Everybody has another idea.
Maybe sometimes you do like a turn-taking gesture, like you just did.
Such as this?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Nice.
When things are ambiguous and you want to point to things.
You can use pointing gestures, absolutely. So those are different kind of gestures. That's the second question. Why do you think that happens? Do you think it's always intentional?
No.
So definitely when we speak, some gestures are not. I'll talk a bit more about this, but basically, you could put gestures on a scale, on a continuum, from being completely intentional, completely conventionalized. So all these Italian gestures, they have a meaning, and they have been conventionalized in a way. And while we speak, I do some gestures. Sometimes I don't even think about this. And some we call beats, which are really this kind of stick-like rhythmical gesture we use to punctuate the discourse. And those are completely not, they do not have a meaning about them. They're really, they accompany the discourse. So, we answered those questions.
So are some of them, sorry,
yeah.
are some of them also physiological? Like if you're afraid of something, you will put more distance or lean if you're interested.
Yes,
your pupils will dilate if you're interested and stuff like that.
So it's true. There's a long-standing debate on, well, on emotions. Are emotions first, or is the body reaction first? Is it the chicken or the egg?
Oh, really?
And there's some truth to both, probably. And for example, disgust, which is one of the basic facial emotions. So it's an asymmetrical expression where you kind of close one eye, you try to avoid. Your body, the body expression of disgust would be to back away, fear as well. So definitely, there's also some international things here. So, what kind of gestures are there? I'm going to present a taxonomy from Ekman and Friesen. It's not all about gestures, it's actually also about other kind of bodily signals. But that Ekman and Friesen basically put under this umbrella term gestures. So the first one is emblems. Those are really cultural, and they can be very different from country to country. For example, the OK sign in the USA is very common, but in many countries in Europe, it's actually an obscene gesture. You have the same thing for the thumbs up, which is also very, very common here. So from country to country, you have different emblems, but those are really, really common. Illustrators. So those are the gesture you use while you speak to help you disambiguate, to help you put some emphasis on what you're speaking. Sometimes when people talk about abstract things, they can do this circular gesture, or there's this cup gesture when you're talking about holding something, or talking about the various things, glasses, cups, bowls. Affect display, so that's what you were just talking about. So expressions of emotions, all types of emotions, the 6 basic ones, but also others, such as pride. Regulators, so those are the ones we use for turn taking, for example, but also, oh, please slow down. Well, exactly. So those are really, there's not really an emblem because you can do them in many different ways. You can give the turn to somebody by doing many kinds of gestures. But they're here really to support and regulate the discourse and the exchange. And finally, adapters. So some people don't say they're really gestures. They're definitely arm and hand movements, but they're here to satisfy needs. So you rub your hand, you rub your eyes, you scratch, you hold a pen. So there are many kinds of adapters. Self-adapters or object adapters, for example. So if you scratch your arm or if you hold a pen and you fiddle with it, it's a different kind. So this is the first taxonomy that you can use to try to put different kind of nonverbals into categories. All right. So some theoretical points about gestures. McNeill is an author who studied gestures, and his main theory is that actually language and gestures come from the same kind of thought process, and this explains why we actually gesture and speak at the same time. So in his theory, before language, we actually produce this kind of thought units that he calls growth points, and that are actually illustrated in our minds, and they are both semantic and so pictorial in a way, and then when we actually produce a language, we do both at the same time. So when you do a theory of language and gesture, you always wonder why are these coverbal, and this is a possible explanation. Then I talked a little about the continuum proposed by Camden, another gestural researcher. He basically looked at how gestures can be conventionalized or absolutely not conventionalized. Can they replace language or not? So you have completely co-verbal gesture and ad hoc, so you just create them on the fly on the left, and on the right completely conventionalized, such as sign language, for example, for mutes and deaf people. Finally, another theoretical point, Kita studies timing of gestures, and basically you usually can organize them around a stroke, so if I have this stroke, or this stroke, and Kita basically studied the various timings and came up with this organization scheme of a preparation. So when you do, you can have your hands in the preparation phase here, and then you do your gesture. And if you have various gestures in a sequence, that's called co-articulation, and then it's a bit different. But basically, so gestures have been studied extensively on their timings, on their meanings, and on how they come from. So this is an example of the kind of gesture or models we use, and we have developed at the Institute for Creative
Realistically
Technologies.
speaking, neither one of you can afford this mortgage on your own, okay? And that's a shame because this building will continue to increase in value. I get nothing but phone calls about it, all right? Waiting for a unit to open up. So as your realtor, the last thing I would suggest is selling. But as your friend, I just don't see any other solution.
Right, stop there. But just to show you that nowadays for virtual character simulation, we can actually do quite realistic gestures, and those are actually created from the audio file. So this is quite interesting. You can actually just record yourself and have a virtual character just replay what you do and do relevant gestures automatically. So now the face. Some questions for you again. What parts of the face are important? Right? What parts of the face?
Yeah.
All of them? So is the forehead important?
Yeah.
Yes. For the wrinkles, maybe? Yeah. Are the cheeks important?
Yeah.
Also. So why are the cheeks important, for example?
When you smile, the jawline will.
Absolutely. So smiling is a great example because you can actually, one of the discerning features of a true smile and a fake smile, what we call the Duchenne smile, Duchenne is another researcher, is the true genuine smile is actually that you raise your cheeks and you splint your eyes at the same time as you smile. So you can just smile like this, but it's not going to be really a true smile. But all the parts of the face are important, but maybe some of them are more salient than others. Facial emotions are important, but can you see other uses for facial movements? In conversation, is there a use for facial movements?
Back channel? If you want. Some kind of back channels.
Some kind of back channels, yes. I saw maybe something. No?
Giving directions.
Pointing, yeah. You can point with your eyes, absolutely. So yes, many other uses. And emotions. So we talked about the 6 basic emotions. Do you have any idea of how many emotions we can convey? Just 6 or more?
There are about 100. If you see WhatsApp smileys, each smiley conveys different emotion.
Right, so I don't have a number, so I don't know, but maybe it's 100, yeah. But it's definitely more than 6. However, it's true that the basic theory of emotions states there are 6 basic emotions, and those are the most common, maybe the most primary, so the one that we really don't control. Some other researchers added more on that, so more than anger, fear, happiness, disgust. They added social emotions, such as maybe pride, shame. So things that have a social aspect. If you're ashamed, usually it's that maybe you broke a social norm. If you're proud, it's not just for yourself, it's because of a community and maybe you did good. Maybe not that simple, but anyway. So you all recognize those emotions, right? So starting from the top left, it's anger, right? Surprise. Disgust, then bottom left. Right. So on top of it, I think it's more fear, and bottom right, it's surprise, actually. Yeah. So those are the photographs of emotion used by Ekman from his really seminal studies on emotions. So action units, we talked a bit about them. They are about, I think depending on the system, 30 to 40. The numbering scheme is not complete, so you have some holes in there. So those are the upper action units. So I think we talked about it just to nail it down further, maybe. Action units are not, they have just a common scheme for describing facial actions. What they represent is actually some atomic movements we can do, which are not just one muscle, but sometimes combination of muscles. But that we cannot really separate them, basically. We do these action units one at a time. And what's really great about this scheme is that it's complete and it's very economical. So we're not going to ask you to know all of them, but it's good to know some. For example, like action unit 6, which is just cheek razor, which is the one we use to discern the fake smile from the genuine smile. The eyebrows can be useful to know. So 1 and 2 are the razor of eyebrows, inner or outer. So the lower action unit. In the facial coding system, there's something else maybe you need to know. When you describe a facial expression, you also add to each action unit an intensity measure, basically. C being quite strong, E being very strong, and A being the weakest. So you could actually be trained online to become what they call a fax coder, to become professionally knowledgeable in how to annotate these emotions from pictures. Right, and so this coding scheme is useful in the sense that we can describe the different emotions by the kind of action units they use. And then if you have a software that can recognize action units, you can just do a comparison and say, well, now I see happiness with different kind of intensities. So I wanted to maybe make you do an exercise. I think it's going to be too hard. What actions unit do you think are on, maybe surprise here, which ones do you think are activated? So this second picture. So AU2, yes, definitely. Eyebrows, other eyebrow action units?
AU27.
27, yeah, definitely. Maybe also 26, yeah, depends. Also maybe AU1 and 2 together, depending. You raise the whole eyebrows, not just the inner or outer part. So those are the main ones, right? And for anger, it's the reverse thing. So we lower the eyebrows with action unit 4. We press the lips, so I think that's 24 or 23. So there's a scheme that was developed by Ekman, saying for all these kind of emotions, the kind of action you have. So there are differences between sexes in that study. I'm not sure it's always true. However, you see the main ones. So for anger, yes, action you need 4 is the lower eyebrows. Happiness, you have 6 and 12. 6 is the cheek, 12 is raise of the lips. And for surprise, we said 1, 2, 25, 27. So we got some of them right, maybe not all of them, but it's a difficult thing. All right, so other uses for conventional facial movements. So just a quick video. I think it's pretty crazy. You know this one?
Yeah.
Can you guys do this? I cannot. I can't raise one eyebrow. Some people can. Right, so not all of these are emotions, clearly, but they can signal many things, such as uncertainty, disbelief, surprise, also, well, it's an emotion, but maybe, yes, emphasis when you speak, and something is very strong, you can actually do a nod and raise your eyebrows. There's facial movements. Winks are also a conversational facial movement that's very useful in conversation, some conversations. Now, head movements and head positions. Head nods and head shakes, so those can vary from culture to culture. In general, in the Western world, you have up and down means agreement, side means disagreement. If you go to Bulgaria, it's the reverse. So it's, I think maybe in Greece also, I'm not exactly sure. I think in India you also have the side by side. Anyway, some can tell us more about that. I'm not exactly sure what it means. But, so you have cultural variations. In the Western world, it's mostly up and down, side to side. Head positions, when you're in conversation, somebody's like this, it can be dominance, or it can be disbelief, or maybe arrogance. Conversely, if somebody's usually have their head lowered, you can signal submission to the other person they're talking to. Head canting, so head tilt, so that's having your head to the side, so that's sometimes referred as predominantly female signal of liking or maybe appreciation, affiliation. Deictic, so you can, we talked about this with eyes, but you can actually point with your head, and so on. Now, gaze. Gaze has a lot of functions. I'm just going to throw them all. One is clearly, well, maybe the first function of your eyes is to seek information and to you look at what you want to get information about. The other one is to regulate speech. I'm going to talk a bit more about that, but basically one of the strongest turn-taking signals is gaze. At the beginning of your turn, when you take a conversation and you want to hold it, you actually look further, sometimes away, to signal also that you're thinking. You can do that, so that signals your cognitive load. And finally, the amount of gaze you dedicate to a person can signal friendliness or also anger. So if you actually stare at someone, it's actually a very strong signal that you have also seen in animals. So animals, for most animals, eye gaze is a very strong signal of aggression sometimes. But generally, if you look at someone more, you like them more, unless you go up that threshold where you actually hate them. Also distant conversation, I speak more about that. So Kendon, we talked about him for gestures, but he also did very important studies on gaze, on the functions of gaze. Well, you can look at the details of that table. It's maybe the first study where somebody looked at the amount of gaze that people do when they speak or when they listen. And the takeaway point is that while you speak, you look less than when you listen. So while you speak, you look away most of the time, and when you listen, you look at the person that you're speaking to most of the time. So obviously there are large variations from person to person, from context to context. For example, if you have objects that are relevant to your conversation, you're going to look at them. If you share a note, if you're talking about coding assignment, you're coding together, you're going to look at what you do together. Within a basic diet, conversational face-to-face, nothing else involved, usually you look more at your interlocutor while you listen than while you speak. So, same study by Kendon. This is basically the amount of gazing that you dedicate to the other, depending on at the end of your sentence or the start of your sentence. I think one is, this is when you give the turn, so you were speaking until then, so you dedicate a certain amount of your gaze, and then when you want the other interlocutor to speak, when it's their turn to speak, most of the time you speak when you look at them. Then you come back to basically. Conversely, when you take the turn here, usually people actually withhold their gaze and look away. There's a theory proposed by another researcher, Aga, which I think is really neat. It's called the intimacy equilibrium, and it talks about gaze particularly. What it states is that basically when you're speaking to a person, you have a certain amount of intimacy that you want to negotiate with, that you're comfortable with. And that level of intimacy, you kind of then adjust your behaviors according to it. So you take the amount of gaze you look at the person, you take the proximity to them, the amount of smiling and the intimacy of the topics you're discussing. You add them all up, and they're going to be at a certain value. And basically, you're going to try to match the intimacy value that you want. Then, if you are really close to the other, you can look at them less, because you want that would be too intimate. Or if you're really close to each other and talking with very intimate things, then maybe you will not look at them at all. Or you will, depending on your intimacy level. So one interesting study that was done by Aga to verify this. Yes, there was a question. Oh, there's lots of, excuse me?
Can you use a microphone?
I don't know if there's a microphone here, unfortunately. I'll try to speak a bit louder then, yeah. If that's fine, this level. So another, in a study done by Aga, they actually had two people sitting next to each other at a table, and they had two observers behind a blind, one-way blind window. And they adjusted how one of the confederates, how close they sat to the other person. So they could sit around here or around here, and they looked at, in the same kind of interaction, how much do they look at the other? How much does the subject look at the confederate? And it's very neat because it's clear-cut results. So this is a distance in feet. So here people are really, really close to each other, 2 feet. And here it's 10 feet. And this is the amount of seconds that the subject looks at the confederate. So it's a 3-minute interaction, I think, roughly, because it wasn't that controlled. But basically, if people are very, very close, they look much less at the confederate than if they are further apart. Also, there are gender differences as well, where female pairs actually look at each other more than male subject and female confederate. So, interesting. All right, so body posture. What can we say from body posture? What can we say about a group of people, the way they assemble themselves in open space?
Confidence, nervousness.
So confidence, can you elaborate maybe?
Like if a person is kind of shaking or maybe leaning forward, then he is more nervous. But if he is standing straight and moving forward,
okay, yeah, absolutely. So the relaxation of your posture, the kind of space, the amount of space you're using, definitely. Yeah.
The level of comfort with the other person, like how comfortable they are being around them.
So in that translates to what maybe the orientation you have, or?
Yeah, the way they speak to them, like the kind of topics they bring up with them.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea also. So the way you sit and you choose your position next to other persons is really important. I want to illustrate that with another video. Lots of videos today.
It's in our nature. Everybody needs their personal space. But what are the boundaries of personal space for business people? That's what KLM wants to know, so they can improve their comfort level on business class throughout Europe.
I just love what this guy did, which is just being uncomfortable to other people. So,
Being the social scientist Albert T. Hall defined personal space in 1954 as the region surrounding a person which they regard as psychologically theirs.
Right, so we
Poor guy needs confidence boosters
Yeah.
after being exposed to that much heat.
It has been hard to actually go there and
I
do
can
this.
see that.
So it's interesting how hard this is imprinted in us, and how we know where to stand in an open space because we have so many options. So it was mentioned that a researcher called Hall defined this kind of concept of personal, intimate, and public space. And basically, those are what they are in the Western world. Once again, there are many differences by culture. For example, in Mediterranean, you actually can probably be closer than those, but this is probably US-based societies. So intimate distance is really only the closest family members or friends will be there. Personal relationship will be with friends. Social relationship is a kind of usual that you have with any kind of people. And the public relationship usually, in a sense, it's not really a conversation anymore. It's really distant. It's the kind of things we're having right now. I'm quite kind of far from you. Or you can have when you speak in front of an assembly. All right, so body posture. Body orientation tells a lot about how you feel about a person. One thing is how you orient themselves towards them. What's interesting about body posture is that it's really unconscious most of the time. And so if you're in a meeting and you look at who is oriented towards who, or maybe not a meeting, but a casual, friend outing, and that can tell a lot. Maybe also sometimes two people are speaking, but they're not oriented toward each other, which also can be an interesting signal. A very, very strong signal of affiliation is if people actually mirror the posture. It's not instantaneous, it's not exactly the same, but usually if people are really maybe lovers or people in a relationship can quite fast adopt the same posture completely unconsciously. And finally, so there was a comment about this, the kind of posture you adopt tells a lot about your level of confidence or maybe your social status. And if you're not really comfortable where you are in the social situation you are, maybe you will be crouched and you'll have defensive postures compared to if you're really confident, you can be very relaxed, you'll take a lot of space. Actually, the amount of space you take, also not just sitting, but standing, if you're all having a coffee in a circle, you'll see if somebody's taking a lot of space, even with their gestures, usually that signals that they have kind of a higher position in the group, or at least that they feel that they are. All right. So I think we made more or less, we talked about all of these different kind of communicative behaviors. Now moving on, are there no questions on this for now? Yes?
Is there any software which can track all these gestures? Like if I pass a video, which it can track like at what point, what gesture was there in the video?
So for gestures, it's, I think, not really, there won't be a software that will work really well. For many reasons. One is that it's actually quite hard to recognize a gesture because they're all very different, except emblems. Usually you have a high level of what we call idiosyncrasy, so differences between people and different types of gestures. So not really. For facial emotions, facial expressions, yes, there is. And we'll introduce you to it probably before the next discussion and give you a small tutorial on how to use it. Especially, there's one software called OpenFace that we'll discuss, which is very useful because you can extract action units from a video. It also can extract eye gaze. So I think in your different projects it would be a good software to use. For gestures it's a bit hard. And maybe if you want to do that yourself, you will have to resort to manual annotation. What we do in our kind of work, in our studies, usually we use a Kinect actually. If you just have a video, you just have RGB information, you just have color and illuminance. The Kinect, what it gives you is actually depth. And depth is really useful because you can really get an idea of the skeleton of the person, you know where they are. And once you have that, you can reason with the angles and the positions of the different joints of the arms. But I don't know, if it's something you're interested in your projects, we could probably make sure you guys have a Kinect, but then you'll need maybe your own data. We can talk about this. Any other questions?
I've been working with Kinect, but for art projects, so.
Yeah.
However, overlaying a skeleton on a video is not a problem in Kinect at all, neither the first one or the second one. So what you will go through that is you will manually label it, right?
So if a Kinect or with a video, if you just have a webcam video, let's say.
No. What I'm thinking is a Kinect recorded with the skeleton overlaid.
So you want to recognize gestures with some Kinect data. What you could do, yes, is you record some gesture with a Kinect of the same kind of gesture. Let's say thumbs up. You have 10 people doing it. They're doing it differently. The Kinect one won't have the fingers. Maybe it's a bad example, but maybe the circle gesture.
Okay.
So you do a database of these, and then you could learn a classifier that takes into in input any Kinect skeleton data and try to see is this circle gesture. We could definitely do that. There are libraries existing where you basically define symbolically some gestures, such as I don't know, a nod, because you can do that with the Kinect. You have the neck would be first down, then up, or then up and down. Nod is also very hard because you have a lot of idiosyncrasy. But there are libraries for that with the Kinect if you want to do gesture detection.
It sounds like a good idea. I would love to.
Okay, yeah, that's a good. It's a difficult problem though.
It's a difficult problem?
Yeah, because it's so.
In that case, maybe.
Because there are so many differences.
Yeah.
That's why. So depending on your gesture, some gesture can be very easy to recognize, some can be very hard. For example, just a head nod is very hard to detect, and it's so important. However, yes.
But like leap motion is doing amazing progress with just fingers, right?
Absolutely. So if you have leap motion, then it's great because it's very, very precise finger tracking. I'm not sure we'll be able to get that. Maybe there's, if you have some data.
Yeah, I have all of the toys.
Oh, great. In that case, that would be great, yeah. Right. Okay, so I'm moving on. What time will we do? So now we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do to detect faces and to detect facial landmarks, so action units, basically. But facial points, basically, usually what the process goes through when you have an image you want to detect is there a face, is there an emotion. First you detect faces, then you register them, and that is you actually find their orientation, scale precisely, and then you detect facial points precisely, so the different, maybe the outer parts of the lips, maybe the outer part of the eyes, and the chin, the jaws, and then you detect emotions with maybe certain kind of feature extraction techniques and then classification techniques. So, you have an input image, you try to find some descriptors, those can be the facial feature points, but those can be other things such as edge maps of the edges of the face or the facial contours. And then you use a classifier using a database of examples that you have to find maybe a facial expression of happiness or maybe something else. Audiovisual tracking is when you have multiple images in a row. So you can do that for eye gaze tracking, head tracking, and all these different examples. But it's more or less the same thing, just you have a different model that will take into account the previous information of the previous image into your model. Alright, so what do we use usually when we do facial expression recognition or facial face detection? We use different kind of features, different kind of methods to detect faces. So first one is simply image templates. A template is simply a small image that you use and you try to match in any new image. So usually it will be very small. It could be an, I don't know, 16 by 16 pixel back of an eyebrow, the edge of an eyebrow. If you would take that whole face and try to match it on any other image, it would be very, very hard. what you can do using those templates is then you try with a new image to match it everywhere on that new input image, and you get a similarity measure. So if on that point the new image you have is very similar to the template, you have a very high value. If it's very dissimilar, you have a very low value. And you can use this to find which is the point in the new image that is most likely to have something similar to that template. So optical flow is something that you use typically for tracking, is basically the impression, the gradient of where things to be moving. This is mostly used for tracking faces or bodies in a sequence of images. Image gradient, so you can use basic image processing techniques to detect contours of edges or gradients of colors, gradients of luminance on an image. And this can be used, for example, here you can detect the edges of the face with this kind of techniques. Yes, so what I described. We'll probably also next lecture give you a small tutorial on how to use this kind of thing. So in particular, filters to detect edges or contours, corners on an image. So there are very, very simple techniques you can use to do that. So if you choose to work with images or videos, those are some things you could use. Histogram gradient. So this is more of a global kind of feature. So for example, in this quadrant of this image, you divide it into quadrants and you look at each one of them and you see in which direction does light seem to change. So is it more in this corner? Maybe it's more light down there and darker there. So you could have a dark gradient that seems to be going this way. SIP descriptors, so those are another kind of feature that you can use to try to match different kind of images by how similar they are. For example, if they have a similar object, if you take, I don't know, you take a picture outside of the USC campus and you move 3 meters and you take the kind of the same building, another picture, and then SIP descriptors will be able to tell you, oh, this is the same object, it's just at a different point in that new image. And using these kind of features, you can try to see if things, landmarks that you have in different images, and you can actually basically compute and rebuild a 3D image using these kind of features. So other kind of filters you can use to, actually quite commonly used in facial expression recognitions are Gabor transformation. So those are filters you use on an image to try to see, you take this data set of various filters that are different spatial orientation and amplitude. Then you apply them and you see various kinds of edges and various kind of local features on your images. I don't think we need to go into detail about these because in this class it's mostly about using those tools to go to facial expression recognition, not going into detail about image processing. And finally, one very simple kind of filters that you use is a half filter, which is you just add the values of the pixels on a certain area and you subtract the pixel on a certain area. This seems very, very simple and maybe very kind of dumb, but it's actually used in the most common facial detection algorithm. The one that you have in your camera phones, maybe that you've seen, and there's some faces detected, it probably uses this kind of filter. I think, well, before going to the methods, maybe we're going to take a break here. I don't know what you guys think. It's 10 to 9? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's meet back at 9 and then we'll go to the start of the lecture.